Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian, and I am out here today with a very simple rifle, but one with some interesting history to it. This is a Remington Rolling Block, and it's not just any rolling block. This is actually one of the World War I M1914 French Remington Rolling Blocks. So just a little bit of quick history on the design in general. Remington introduced this rifle as a black powder single-shot cartridge rifle in 1866. And it was kind of a two-part thing. It was legitimately a very good rifle, and it was also a very aggressively marketed rifle by Remington. It quickly became very popular, and these were sold to a massive number of countries. Several dozen countries at least purchased rolling blocks to arm their military forces. In fact, by the 1875 catalog, Remington was able to claim that they had sold over 1 million of these rifles around the world. Now, these were successful guns during the time period of the single-shot cartridge rifle. So, by about 1900, these were really waning. By 1900, there were a number of different magazine-fed options out there. Most militaries, modern militaries, had transitioned to magazine rifles. And the countries that were still using rolling blocks were countries in places like South America and Asia, where having a low-cost rifle that was simple to use and very durable was more important than having the most modern firepower available. So, in fact, by 1913, the only rolling blocks that Remington was actually still producing new, now they were still selling others from already produced stock, but the only ones they were still actively producing were rimfire guns. Nothing in modern military calibers. Well, World War I starts, and the French have the 1886 Lebel. It's a modern rifle. It's getting a little bit old by World War I, but it's still a reasonably modern rifle, and it's an expensive rifle to make. It takes money and it takes time to manufacture Lebels. And the French start losing more guns to combat losses than they can make up for. So the French did a couple things to try and get good Lebel rifles accessible to their frontline troops. They wanted to get them out of the hands of the people who really didn't need the most modern rifle. People who could use something like a single-shot rifle instead. And that way, those guys' Lebels could be sent to the front where they were needed much more badly. So they did a couple things. They took their outdated 11mm black powder Gras rifles and they rebarreled them. But that was also an expensive process, and it was hard to find a lot of companies in France who were interested in taking on contracts to do that work. So they also went to the United States, a country that was neutral in the conflict and whose companies were quite happy to build arms on contract for anyone who had money. Well, the French went to Remington. The French had actually bought and used old black powder Remington rifles during the Franco-Prussian War, so they were familiar with the design, they knew it was a good gun, and they contracted with Remington to buy 100,000 Remington rolling blocks in 8mm Lebel. Interestingly, the contract was signed on November 19th, 1914, and Remington started up production 5 days later on November 24th. By early in 1916, the guns were all produced and had been delivered. In total, it was 100,291 of these rifles were sent to France. They were used primarily by rear echelon troops, the people who didn't really need a totally modern rifle, like I said. Initially, the intent was drivers, both animal team drivers and mechanical vehicle truck drivers would get these rifles. And I should add, this example is a rifle. They did make both rifles and carbines on this contract. So a couple things that distinguish them. They do have a wooden upper handguard, which is not unique to the French, but it is one element you can see. Most significantly, they are marked caliber 8mm on the barrel. And these are the only 8mm rolling blocks that were made. You'll find a lot of other military ones in 7mm that predate these in the same basic style, but 8mm guns are French guns. You'll also typically find a French serial number down here on the buttstock and also under the handguard. So other than that, the French didn't really do much marking to them. This particular one is interesting in that it clearly stayed in French service because it has been marked with an N here, which is indicative of the gun being rechambered in the late 1930s for the new French ball end cartridge. So this probably went on to see use with a prison guard, something like that. Again, someone who didn't need a super modern blaster, but just any old rifle that would work. So The way these work, of course, is you have both a hammer and a breech block. Cock the hammer, and then you can open up the breech. You drop a single round in, you close the breech, fire the gun. There is an interaction between the hammer and the breech block inside the receiver that when the hammer drops, it solidly locks the breech block from opening. These were actually quite strong guns, really very good guns. If cost and politics had not been an issue, this would have been a better gun for the US to adopt instead of the trapdoor Springfield early in its life cycle. So I will have to do a little bit of tapping to get cartridges out of this because this particular one is missing its extractor, but I figure we can do a little bit of shooting. I've got myself some Pervy Partisan 8mm Lebel, which is designed to duplicate the French World War I load, more or less, and just put a shot or two through it. Should point out the sights go out to 2,400 meters, which is ridiculously optimistic with a gun like this, but there it is. So, all right, let's try a shot. So it shoots like a single shot 8mm Lebel rifle, to be honest. To unload the thing, to eject the empty case, we're going to recock the hammer, pop open the breech block. Normally, if this had its extractor, that would pull the empty case out. Since it does not, I'm going to bounce it on my boot here. There we go. Pull out the empty case. We can do one more. There we go. You know, these are pretty cool rifles. Remington did, in fact, also make a bayonet for them. The bayonets are rather difficult to find these days, but fits on the end. The bayonet's basically the same military pattern Remington used on earlier rolling blocks. But there you go. If you want the oldest and most obsolete brand new manufactured rifle of World War I, this would be it. It is, as far as I can tell, the only single-shot new production rifles that were actually put into use during the Great War. So, very cool example of a rather scarce, these days, French rifle. If you'd like to see more, make sure to tune in again to ForgottenWeapons.com for other interesting old single-shot military rifles. And if you would like to help contribute to keep this project going, please consider checking out my Patreon page, where you can donate to help send me to interesting museums and other firearms collections. Thanks for watching.